You remember Sophie Pecora as the young singer who walked onto America's Got Talent with a guitar, an original song, and almost no need for a huge production. But here's what nobody expected years later. Sophie Pecora is still making music, and her latest move in 2026 shows that the story didn't end when America's Got Talent stopped following her. On July 24, 2026, Sophie released Poker Face, currently listed by Apple Music as her latest release. That might not sound like a massive television comeback, but that's exactly what makes it interesting. Sophie didn't return to AGT with another golden buzzer. She didn't suddenly become a mainstream pop superstar. Instead, she continued doing the one thing that defined her before the cameras ever found her, writing and releasing her own music. For viewers who remember the teenager from 2019, that creates a very different picture of where she is today. Because the Sophie Pecora who stepped onto the AGT stage was only one version of the artist. The person releasing music in 2026 has had years to grow, experiment, and figure out what she actually wants to sound like. The moment that changed everything for Sophie came in 2019, when she was introduced to millions of America's Got Talent viewers as a young singer-songwriter with an original song called Misfits. The performance was personal, direct, and completely different from a typical reality show cover. Instead of relying on a famous song, Sophie was asking the audience to listen to something she had written herself. Guest judge Brad Paisley noticed immediately. During the judge cuts, he pressed the golden buzzer for Sophie, sending her directly into the live shows. The moment instantly changed the scale of her career. Suddenly, the young singer who had been writing songs had become one of the contestants everyone was watching. The golden buzzer also created an expectation that can be difficult for any young performer to escape. When millions of people see a teenager receive that kind of recognition, they naturally assume the next step will be even bigger. They expect the deep run in the competition, the television appearances, the record deal, and eventually the mainstream career. But Sophie's story did not follow that traditional reality show trajectory, and that is where the part of her journey that many viewers missed begins. The golden buzzer may have looked like the beginning of a huge AGT victory, but Sophie's competition ended much sooner than many viewers expected. She reached the quarterfinals and performed her original song, Happy in LA. The judges responded strongly, with standing ovations during the performance. But once America's vote became decisive, the golden buzzer was no longer enough to guarantee her a place in the next round. Sophie finished in the lower voting group and entered the Duncan save alongside other contestants. She ultimately failed to advance and was eliminated from the competition. That result created a strange contrast. On one side, Sophie had received one of the biggest endorsements a contestant could get from a guest judge. On the other, her actual competition journey ended in the quarterfinals. There was no finale performance and no winner's moment waiting for her at the end. For a teenager who had suddenly been placed under a national spotlight, that could easily have become the end of the story. And for many AGT viewers, it probably did. The show moved forward. New contestants took the stage. New stories replaced the old ones. But Sophie had something that reality television could not take away from her: the ability to write her own songs. And after AGT ended, that became more important than the golden buzzer itself. Here's the part that changes the entire narrative. Sophie did not stop creating music when America's Got Talent stopped showing her. Her official biography says her debut EP, Raise the Bar, was released at the end of 2020, followed by the Wildflower EP in 2021. Her music continued to revolve around songwriting, emotion, and personal storytelling. Her song, Seventh Grade, won first place in the teen category of the International Songwriting Competition in 2019, and Anxiety later won the grand prize in the unsigned-only music competition from 10,000 entries representing 120 countries, according to her official biography. That is significant because it shows that Sophie had another source of recognition outside television. AGT gave her enormous exposure, but songwriting was never dependent on AGT. She already had a creative identity before the golden buzzer, and she continued developing it afterward. Her official website describes her as a singer-songwriter, rapper, and poet, and says she enjoys turning feelings into art. That gives us a much clearer explanation of what happened after the show. Sophie wasn't waiting for another television opportunity to tell her story. She was continuing to create music that could exist without a television audience. The spotlight became smaller, but the work continued. And that distinction is exactly why saying Sophie simply disappeared would be misleading. She became less visible to casual television viewers. She did not stop being an artist. The biggest change happened gradually, and you can see it by looking at the music rather than the television appearances. As the years passed, Sophie's catalog expanded beyond the songs that introduced her on AGT. Apple Music lists releases including Extrovert and Perfectionist from 2023, followed by projects and singles in 2024 such as The Youth, Crime Scene, Vampire, Battlefield, and Mood Swings. That is a very different body of work from the handful of songs viewers remember from her teenage years. The important point is not that every song represented some dramatic reinvention. It is that Sophie kept experimenting instead of trying to remain permanently frozen as the young AGT contestant. Her official website continues to feature original songs such as I'm Fine, Pretty People, Keeping Everything Inside, Anxiety, Wildflower, and Overthinking. That growing catalog tells a much more interesting story than a simple before and after transformation. Sophie grew older while continuing to write. Her experiences changed. Her interests changed. And naturally, the music changed with her. That's what happens when a young songwriter is allowed to keep developing rather than being defined forever by the television moment that introduced her. By the time the next phase arrived, the question was no longer whether Sophie could perform on AGT. It was what she would do without AGT. The next surprise is that there wasn't actually a dramatic disappearance in 2025. Sophie continued adding music to her catalog, with releases including Aliens and Brainless listed among her recent work. The difference was visibility. A television audition can put a performer in front of millions of people in one night. An independent music release does not work that way. There is no judging panel announcing the song. There is no golden buzzer. There is no guaranteed primetime audience waiting to hear it. A song simply appears, and the artist has to build attention around it. That makes a career like Sophie's much easier for casual viewers to miss. Someone can remember an AGT contestant vividly and then assume nothing happened because they stopped seeing that person on television. But music platforms tell a different story. Sophie continued releasing songs and maintaining an audience outside the AGT ecosystem. Her official website still presents her work as an active music catalog rather than a collection of old AGT memories. This is where the phrase "nobody expected" becomes useful, but only if we use it honestly. The unexpected part isn't that Sophie secretly became a massive superstar. The evidence doesn't support that. The unexpected part is that, after the television spotlight faded, she kept moving forward anyway. And by 2026, that persistence produced something concrete enough to make people start paying attention again. Then came 2026, and the change became impossible to ignore. Sophie released The Quiet Kid on February 13, 2026, before following it with Poker Face on July 24. The title, The Quiet Kid, is especially interesting because of the image many viewers still associate with Sophie. On AGT, she was presented as a young, relatively understated performer who could stand on a giant stage with a guitar and command attention through songwriting rather than spectacle. Years later, that same artist released a new song carrying a title that immediately evokes the idea of the quiet outsider. But there is an important line we should not cross. There is no verified statement establishing that The Quiet Kid was specifically written about AGT or her teenage television experience. So we shouldn't invent that connection. What we can say is that the contrast is striking. The teenager viewers remember is frozen in old AGT footage. The real Sophie continued growing long after those episodes aired. She released more music. She developed her catalog, and in 2026 she was still creating. Then Poker Face arrived in July, becoming her latest release listed by Apple Music. That makes the current situation surprisingly simple. Sophie didn't need another reality show audition to prove she was still an artist. The new music did that for her. And here's where Sophie Pecora's latest move becomes more interesting than a traditional comeback story. Poker Face did not arrive with a golden buzzer, a television competition, or a giant mainstream media campaign. It arrived as another release from an artist who has spent years building a catalog outside the original AGT spotlight. Apple Music currently identifies Poker Face as Sophie's latest release, dated July 24, 2026. Her official website continues to present her music and original videos, reinforcing the fact that songwriting remains central to her work. So what did Sophie actually do after AGT? She kept going. That's the part that is easy to overlook because it isn't dramatic enough for a typical headline. There was no single event that suddenly transformed everything. Instead, there was a series of small decisions. Write another song, release another project, experiment with another sound, keep building. And eventually, those decisions created a career that no longer depended entirely on being remembered as the girl who got Brad Paisley's golden buzzer. That's the real change. Sophie Pecora is no longer simply an AGT contestant. She is an artist whose AGT appearance happens to be one chapter in a much longer timeline. And if viewers only judge her career by what happened on television, they will miss the part she spent years building after the cameras left. So what really happened to Sophie Pecora after America's Got Talent? The answer is not that she vanished, and it isn't that she secretly became a global superstar. The reality is more grounded and in many ways more interesting. Sophie received Brad Paisley's golden buzzer in 2019, reached the quarterfinals, and then left the competition. After that, she continued writing and releasing original music. Her catalog expanded through projects such as Raise the Bar and Wildflower, followed by more singles and projects in the years that came after. Her songwriting also received recognition outside AGT. Then, in 2026, she released The Quiet Kid and Poker Face, with Poker Face currently listed as her latest release. Maybe the biggest mistake we make with young talent show contestants is that we remember them exactly as they looked when we first discovered them. We remember Sophie as the teenager with the guitar. We remember the golden buzzer. We remember Brad Paisley. We remember the AGT stage. But that version of Sophie was only one moment. Years later, she has more songs, more experience, and a completely different stage of life behind her. America's Got Talent gave Sophie Pecora a huge introduction. But it didn't give her an ending. And the unexpected thing she did after AGT wasn't disappearing. It was continuing. While the television audience moved on, Sophie kept making music. And in 2026, she's still writing the next chapter.